very, very warm welcome to my YouTube. My name's Chris, and we're going to take a look at the Flying Nightingales, an interesting group of WAAFs that performed nursing duties shortly after D.DAY, when they were flown into Northern Europe to take care of the wounded soldiers. D.DAY, 6th of June 1944. It was the largest amphibious invasion in the history of warfare. The statistics of D.DAY, codename Operation Overlord, are staggering. The Allied troops used over 5,000 ships and landing craft to land more than 150,000 troops on 5 beaches in Normandy. Lillian West and Elsie Beer, two surviving of the Flying Nightingales, they were the air ambulance nurses of World War II who risked their lives to bring back almost 100,000 wounded soldiers combined from the European mainland back to British hospitals. And during her 4 years with the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, Lillian West witnessed the full horrors of the war. It was not until the 1980s that Lillian West was able, or felt able, to tell her children what she did during the war. "I didn't tell them anything," she said. "I never talked about it very much. We didn't really, our generation. It was just so awful, the things that we saw." 1941, Lillian West spent just 6 weeks training in Exeter. All the Flying Nightingales were volunteers. They weren't recognised as being RAF nurses because they would have had to hold the rank of officer. Their rank wasn't acknowledged and they weren't given medals. They were civilians in uniform.
Straight back.
You couldn't use your parachute.
You had to stay with the patients at all costs.
So if
you got shot down,
you just had to stay with them.
You had to go with them.
Lillian West had to learn how to use oxygen, administer injections, deal with war wounds such as broken bones, severed limbs, burns and head injuries. The nurses were then moved to an airfield in Leicester to learn about how to adapt to flying at altitude and landing in an aircraft.
Well, my first flight, I landed at the edge of a cornfield. We got shelled, my plane, the first time I landed.
That must have been quite scary.
It was terrifying.
Me and Rita Holt, she's dead, God bless her. We were missing in France. Our parents had telegrams to say we were missing and that, and then it came back with another air crash when I burst a tire on London.
The 200 nurses of the RAF's Air Ambulance Unit, which flew under 46th Group Transport Command, were based at 3 airfields: Down Abney in Gloucestershire, Blakehill Farm in Wiltshire and Broadwell in Oxfordshire. At Down Abney the starts were early, the weather often poor. The blue-clad figures would run across the airfield carrying their first aid panniers, a small bottle of oxygen and their parachutes.
See you when you came back.
Yeah, they were. I met Rita up when we were in, when we had the association. She was in a wheelchair then.
I know that Rita. I was quite friendly with her, but she came quite a long time after me.
Yeah.
But I was there down Apney longer than most of them. Sometimes you had to stay overnight, and there were no facilities for women at all.
Nothing.
And and that was very daunting. It was scary. You'd be the only woman on the whole field, and the Germans were still around when we were there.
The outbound flights carried supplies to the Allied troops fighting in France, Belgium, Holland and Germany.
It took the Queen 54 years to recognise us before we were invited to
Buckingham Palace. Did you go to Buckingham Palace?
I went, yes.
And I did.
Yeah. Rita, I met Rita then, and she was in a wheelchair.
Yeah. I remember that.
We were talking, and her grandchildren came round and said, "Is that true what Grandma said, that you and her were missing in France?" So I said, yes. She's
No.
And then the homeward flights with casualties aboard were classified as air ambulance.
Yes, I said
they weren't in France at all, were you?
No, we were in Belgium, weren't we? That was a day that was...
The Flying Nightingales' job was to keep patients alive until they got to Britain.
"We would fly over with medical supplies and drop them off," Mrs. West said.
The young women had little in the way of medical equipment, and sometimes the injuries were horrific.
That one with the face blown away, that I can see that man all my life. And He wanted a drink and he didn't have a mouth to have a drink. I had to give him morphia because he kept tearing at his dressing. You know, you would be surprised, some of the soldiers were terrified.
Some of them were crying, just like babies.
It was very traumatic.
It's all right, it's all right, it's all right. We're going back home now. Used to say, we're going back home now.
And then the wounded would get on and we would take them back to England. The wounded soldiers had been sent to airfields on the French coast.
The Flying Nightingales flew with male aircrew, but were treated rather differently at the time.
We weren't classed as aircrew, and when we came down, we weren't allowed to have aircrew breakfast, were we? Bacon and egg. We had just to have all was in the mess hall, didn't we?
And we often were waiting in the Dakota to pick them up and take them back to England. We had about 18 stretchers in the planes, plus the walking wounded. The nurses were there to keep an eye on the patients. We would give them drinks and put them at their ease. All of their wounds were encased in a saline solution and plastron so they could be treated. Although the nurses were given parachutes, they were told they were only allowed to use them on the flight out. On the way back, their orders were to stay with the plane, treat any survivors, and their parachutes were locked away.
Annoyed.
Annoyed, really, because we were doing the same job as them, but we just weren't treated.
We were taking the same risks.
Same risks as them. We
were getting shot at just the same, weren't we?
His flight log tells the story of those hazardous journeys by Dakota. Was under shell fire, shrapnel through window.
And that's for walking patients.
We had some straps to hang on to, didn't we?
Yeah, small. This one's my made. Now then.
Are you pleased that the Flying Nightingales have finally been recognised?
Oh yes, overjoyed. Yes. Overjoyed that we are. We stayed to tell the tale, and for those that's gone before.
Yeah. We did blaze a trail, didn't we?
We blazed the trail for those to come.
Smile! They're talking about us.
Well, I really hope that was of some interest. It certainly was a bit of a find for me because I hadn't heard or realised that these Flying Nightingales, these very, very brave ladies, flew across to northern France in Dakotas to pick up the injured soldiers, and it's just absolutely fascinating. Well, I wish you all the very best. Take the greatest of care. See you on the next one. Cheers for now.